Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to Fire Emblem Heroes. In this video, I'm going to cover everything related to Aether Raids. If I missed anything, then feel free to chime in and comment down below. So what is Aether Raids? Aether Raid is a player versus player AI game mode just like Arena and Arena Assault, except that there's a twist to it. Instead of just having units facing off against opposing units, there's structures. I'll cover all the structures later on in this video, but for now, let's cover all the basics and we're going to start with this page. Starting from the top, we have AR tier, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's 21 tiers in this game mode, and the higher you're ranked, the more rewards you'll receive at the end of the season. To the right of that is Lift. Lift is basically equivalent to points, and this is what your AR tier is based on, and you can check how all the ranks are broken up by clicking check rewards at the bottom left side of the screen. So how do we acquire Lift? It's acquired by battling opponents and winning those matches. Deathless runs will net you more Lift, and the total amount of Lift that you can receive per match so far is 100. 80 of that is from a Deathless win, and you can receive an additional 20 Lift for just having a bonus unit on your team. Bonus units are going to be important. You'll want to make sure that you're using at least one bonus unit on your raiding team at all times, not only for the extra bonus points, but for the fact that bonus units are granted 10 HP and plus 4 in attack, speed, defense, and resistance, similar to how Arena and Tempest Trials does it. The more bonus units on your team, the more easier your runs will be. Do keep in mind that you do not have to use bonus units on your defending team, so you can use whoever you want there. Alright, so that's the gist of how to acquire Lift, but how about losing Lift? Currently, we cannot lose any. Players will only start to lose Lift once they are in tier 11 or have acquired at least 4,000 Lift. But once you reach tier 11, you'll start losing Lift apparently from failed attacks and defense results. When your defense falls, I believe the amount of Lift that you'll lose is 80, but it also depends on the amount of units that are on your team, which I'll get into a little bit later. Below Lift is Aether. Aether is this game mode's term for stamina. At the beginning of every new season, Aether gets refilled to max. The amount of Aether that can be stored is determined by the level of your Aether Amphory. The higher level that structure is, the more stamina you'll have at the beginning of a new season. Also, every day at the daily reset, Aether is refilled by a fixed number, which currently is 50. There is one more way to gain more Aether, and that's by raiding. When you raid, you want to make sure that you destroy the opponent's Aether Amphory and their Aether Fountain. Destroying those two structures and winning the match afterwards will replenish your Aether by a small amount. I'm not entirely sure how the replenished values are determined, because if I remember correctly, when Aether Raid first came out, I believe I got 1 Aether from destroying one of them and 2 Aether from the other one. The other day I got 2 from each, so I don't know. I'm guessing it has to do something with your tier because that's the only variable that has changed. Nevertheless, you want to make sure that you destroy those two structures if possible before ending the match. Bonus units, I already covered a little bit of that earlier. They basically function the same as bonus units in Tempest Trials. It's not like Arena because getting kills with bonus units doesn't do anything, which is great by the way. In addition to bonus units, we have bonus structures. Having the build bonus structures listed will increase your offensive and defensive fortresses level by 1. This is very important because fortresses grant a ton of extra stats to all your units as long as the condition is met. If your fortress's level is greater than your opponent's, then the difference in levels multiplied by 4 is the amount of extra attack, speed, defense, and resistance that all your allies will receive. For example, if your fortress is level 3 and your opponent's is level 1, then your units are gaining plus 8 to their combat stats. So keeping these fortresses at a high level is going to be crucial once you reach the higher tiers. And back to bonus units and structures, one last thing that I want to mention is that if you click the arrow next to the title, you can see all the next bonuses for the next season. That's going to be a very nice feature to have to help players prepare for the following season. The last thing I want to talk about on this page is defense results at the very bottom. Here you can watch replays and see how you're doing on defense. The replay feature allows you to watch defensive battles, which is very nice to help you see if your defense setup has any vulnerabilities so that you can make any adjustments necessary to improve your defensive setup. Then there's rematch. This feature allows you to battle that person that attacked your defense, and rematching requires the same amount of Aether that is required for raiding. You might be asking the question, what's the point of rematching? Well, once you're able to start losing Lift, you can only lose Lift one time within 20 hours. So if someone attacked your defense and made you lose Lift, well, with the rematch feature, you can click rematch and battle that person and try to beat their defensive setup and make them lose Lift as well. It's basically a revenge option. Alright, so now let's talk about the Aether Keep. This page is where you can customize everything defense and offense except for your offensive team. First, you can change your defensive terrain. There's 10 to select from and each of them has some sort of defensive advantage to them. Some of them feature ponds, forests, destructible walls, mountains, defensive tiles, and etc. Just take a few minutes and look through them and see what works best with the units that you have available. I think the most popular one so far is Spring Breeze, and that's actually the one that I'm using. This one features 2 non-destructible walls at the upper center part of the map. It's a very good map for defensive setups whose sole purpose is to win by stalling out raiders. But yeah, just look through them and see what you like. The Defense Team tab allows you to edit your defensive team. Starting out, you can only have 4 units on your defensive team, but eventually you can deploy 2 additional allies, and there's pros and cons to it. Having 6 units on your defensive team will obviously strengthen your defense, but having additional allies will increase the amount of lift lost, so you need to make sure that you make good use of those additional allies. Below that, you'll see the option to lock the team. Pressing on lock team will save the team's current setup. Their levels, stats, skills, sacred seals, and blessings will be locked for Aether Raid defensive battles. So what that means is that you can build a team for defense, lock it, then you can change the skills around and use the units for different modes or whatever, and your Aether defense team won't be affected. However, when you unlock the team, then your defense will get updated with the most recent changes. The last thing I'm going to talk about are the structures. I'm not going to go too in depth on this topic because I still need to play around with each of them, but I'll give you guys my first impression. Let's start with the offensive structures first. Fortress I've gone over earlier. I think this is a very important building because of the potential amount of extra stats that it can grant. Bolt Tower, I think it kind of sucks. I think it becomes better at a higher level, but I don't think it's worth the investment to upgrade it yet because there's better things to spend your resources on right now. The only reason to build some of these underwhelming structures right now is if they're part of the bonus cycle. Tactics Room I think has the potential to be one of the better offensive structures, mainly because staff units, especially Veronica, tend to give players a lot of trouble. However, the issue is that the Tactics Room has to be lined up with whatever range foe that you're trying to target, so it's not that reliable. I think it becomes more useful once you get to the higher tiers when the player base is smaller and you start facing the same people over and over again. Only then you can adjust and move your tactics room to counter the range foes. Also, it becomes more reliable if a certain defensive strategy becomes popular and is widely used. The healer tower I have mixed opinions about. Let's start with the positives. There's a lot of structures that deal AoE damage, whether it be from shock traps or from bolt tower. The damage from these things add up, right? Especially if you have to tank Razzle Dazzle staff foes to start the match. So if you have healing tower, then it heals your units every turn without needing a staff unit on your team. Even if you do have a staff unit on your team, you won't have to waste the staff unit's turn to heal allies. Instead, you can use them for offense. That's pretty important considering that there's a 7 turn limit. On the other hand, how often do you really get hit by bolt towers and traps? Probably not enough to start using healing tower, but once people have higher level structures that deal more damage, then it might become more useful. Panic Manor is just a 3-column panic ploy. It's really situational, just like the panic ploy skill itself, so probably not that useful for the most part. Catapult is probably one of the better offensive buildings in my opinion. It destroys structures in the same column as it. The less buildings there are for you to worry about, that means you'll have an easier time on offense, and plus structures that are destroyed by Catapult are less structures that you have to waste turns on destroying. Then there's the schools. Basically, build any of these if you're having trouble against a certain class. I think Offensive Armor School is probably the most useful one right now because people like to stack Ward Armor, Warrior Fighter armors together and stall out turns. But yeah, at the end of the day, these schools are all situational, so just build whatever you need. As for defensive structures, again, Fortress is very important. Preventing raiders from getting the bonuses will strengthen your defense. Also, Fortress is the only undestructible structure so far, so you can use it to block spots and create better choke points. Something I forgot to mention is that when you are demoted to a lower tier, then the level of your defense fortress will be lowered as well. So you really have to make sure that you plan and play this game mode wisely and not lose any lift. Defensive Bolt Tower, I have the same thought as the offense one. I think it sucks right now, but it gets better at the higher levels. It's just not worth the investment right now. Defense Tactics Room I think is really good. The defense version covers 3 columns and 7 rows, opposed to the offensive version which only covers 1 column. This structure basically inflicts gravity on ranged foes, so it's going to help by slowing down the foe's advancement if they have ranged foes on their teams, which most teams do. The only problem is that you need a pretty decently high tactics room for it to be effective because the health threshold is only at 40 at level 1. Bonus range units gain 10 extra HP, so tactics room isn't going to be that useful against those guys until it's at a higher level. Like currently, it doesn't even affect bonus unit Versa. Healing Tower is a bit iffy. I'm leaning more towards not that useful because it doesn't necessarily help your defensive setup. From what I've seen from my replays, when my opponents win, they usually kill my guys on the same turn that they attack them, so the heals from Healing Tower becomes irrelevant. I think it would be better to invest in something else like the schools because that way you actually debuff stats, which can become a factor that determines whether or not your unit survives. I mean, I guess whether or not Healing Tower is useful depends on how your team is set up. Defensive Catapult is also useful if you have a specific structure that is important for your defensive strategy. Then what you can do is build a high level catapult behind that structure so that it can take out the Raider's catapult that is placed in the same column. Then lastly, there's the schools, which are situational just like the offensive ones. Build whatever school you need to counter the classes that you're having problems with. Now the last thing I need to cover are the traps. There's Bolt Trap, Heavy Trap, and the fake versions of Bolt and Heavy Traps. When Bolt and Heavy Trap activates, it cancels the foe's attack and assist skills. So what this effect means is that whenever a foe performs an action on top of one of these traps, then that foe's turn immediately ends. This effect is going to be the main reason why you place these traps at the spots they're at. Bolt Trap is especially good because of this. You can set up your defense by having a Bolt Trap set up 2 spaces in front of one of your ranged units, so that when a ranged foe tries to take out your ranged unit, the Bolt Trap will activate, deals 20 damage, and ends their turn, thus preventing the foe from performing its attack. Then on the following turn, your ranged unit can initiate and take out the weakened foe. Heavy Trap honestly kinda sucks. I think it's only useful for the action cancellation. If the opponent isn't brain dead, then it's really easy to play around. Then lastly, the fake traps. They don't do anything other than to disguise as real traps, but they are very important. You want to set up your traps in a way so it's hard to distinguish which traps are real or fake. Give your opponents a 50-50 option and make sure all the traps are placed with a purpose, even the fake ones. You just have to make the opponent have the mindset of, hey, if I step on this trap and if it's real, it might screw up my turn. And that's everything to cover in Aether Raids. I do have a couple ideas planned for videos related to this mode. The obvious idea is to of course make videos covering defense wins to show off successful setups that I came up with. The other idea that I had in mind was similar to big boy builds, except that instead of focusing on showing off your guys' units, I would show off any cool creative defensive setups that you guys might have. And with the replay feature, you could even send me a clip of the replays to demonstrate how your defensive setup works. So yeah, those are the 2 ideas I have in mind so far. Let me know what you guys think. As always, hope you guys enjoyed the video and got something out of it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
呼んでいる